Polatbay Turganbikovich Berdaliyev, born 1986, is an Uzbekistani rapist and serial killer who, along with accomplices Abdulaziz Ormanov and two other unidentified men, was responsible for killing 11 women in both Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan from 2011 to 2012. Berdaliyev and Ormanov were both sentenced to life imprisonment in both countries, while the other members of their group are still sought after. Early life hailing from Uzbekistan, Berdaliyev was considered a quiet, shy and rather unremarkable young man. However, along with his good friend Abdulaziz Ormanov, he raped his fellow female classmates, who never reported the cases to the police, as Polatbay's father was an officer. At one point, he was convicted of robbery in Almaty, receiving a 6-year sentence to be served in the Shymkent colony. While in prison, Polatbay began corresponding with a woman whom he later married, but the couple separated after he was granted parole in 2010. Returning to Uzbekistan, he fell in love with another woman, who became his girlfriend. The couple lived together with relatives of Berdaliyev in Astana, as he wanted to introduce her to his parents before their marriage, to which said parents were starkly opposed against. Despite this, the persistent Polatbay eventually convinced them, and he was allowed to marry the woman. Murders. Modus operandi. Constantly reminding himself of the high school rapes, Berdaliyev eventually expressed a desire to relive the exciting experiences he had. Grouping together with Abdulaziz and their mutual friend, the gang began their killing spree. Their modus operandi involved Polatbay, who went along well with women, searching for young, single female hitchhikers, pretending to be the driver of a private taxi, a black Mercedes. With the offer a ride to their destination, he and the victim would enter the car, in which were Ormanov and the other accomplices posing as other clients, and drive until they could find a lonely road. Under the guise of the car breaking down, Berdaliyev would stop the car, with the gang then proceeding to rape and subsequently strangle their victim using scarves, shoelaces, plastic bags, etc. After the deed was done, the deceased would be robbed of all their possessions, with Polatbay's share often being gifted to his girlfriend and mother, or sometimes sold at pawnshops. Uzbekistan murders and change of venue. The gang, initially operating in Tashkent, managed to get away with the murders of 7 women, 2 of whom had their corpses burned, still unidentified to this day, before police eventually began taking interest in the case. Fearing that he was being closed in on, Berdaliyev began periodically traveling to the neighboring Turkestan region in Kazakhstan, under the pretense of working. He would mainly haunt the Almaty-Shymkent road, killing the victim and then returning home in Uzbekistan the same day. Kazakhstan murders. Natalia Pashkova. The 29-year-old Pashkova, also referred to as Yekaterina Tishkanova, accompanied by her 3-year-old daughter and sister, arrived in Shymkent from Karaganda by train on December 19, 2011. At the train station, Natalia's sister and daughter separated from her and traveled towards Aries, while the smiling Pashkova caught a taxi to her home, in the city center. She was last seen talking with a private taxi driver and boarding his black Mercedes, but never got returned home alive. 2 days later, her body was discovered along the Almaty-Termez highway, with signs of a violent struggle. Pashkova had been raped and then strangled with her sneakers' shoelaces. Her belongings, consisting of a suitcase, laptop, gold earrings and 500 tenge, were missing. All local taxi drivers were interviewed in this case, with some coming forward and saying that they had seen her enter a black Mercedes. However, no arrests were made during the investigation, quickly turning it into a cold case. Berdaliyev. On February 10, the 25-year-old Berdaliyev, also referred to as Alida Altayeva, had left Sarayagash by train headed towards Shymkent, informing her husband of her travels by phone. She had arranged to meet her husband and son at the entrance of the city, but to get there, she needed to catch a taxi. After some time, Berdaliyev phoned her spouse, saying that the taxi had broken down about 30 kilometers away from the city, and that the drivers were taking care of it. Worried, her husband tried to advise her to change cars, but by then, she had already turned off her phone. The husband waited until the late of night before going to the police, but just 2 days later, local residents discovered Asel's body in a step near the highway. She had been raped and smothered to death. Saul Isaacova, the 50-year-old Isaacova, a villager from South Kazakhstan, had come from Astana to Shymkent and was last seen catching a ride from the train station, entering a black Mercedes. On March 12, a shepherd discovered her body. It was determined that Saul had been strangled with her own scarf. In addition, her jewelry, cell phone and about 35,000 tenge were found to be missing. Tamara Asharova, despite knowing that there was somebody killing lonely women, the 54-year-old from the Ordobinsky district was hurrying home on the eve of March 8. Having lowered her guard, she accepted a ride from the black Mercedes without a second thought. That same day, her body was found along the highway. Like the Isaacova, Asharova had been robbed and subsequently strangled. Capture, trial and sentence. Feeling the rising pressure from the mounting cases, Kazakhstani authorities immediately began interviewing all the local informed taxi drivers, as well as sending notices to the police forces in Uzbekistan, Russia and Kyrgyzstan. Eventually, information from the Uzbek authorities surfaced, claiming that they have monitored a suspect who was in the Jambul region. The suspect, Polatbay Berdaliyev, had rented accommodation in Taraz. He was kept under surveillance for 2 days, before he was eventually arrested without resistance. Upon being detained, Berdaliyev almost immediately confessed to all the crimes, also implicating Ormanov and the other accomplices. Shortly after, Abduziad Ormanov himself was arrested by the authorities back in Uzbekistan. Although he didn't look like a bloodthirsty killer, the investigators were shocked when Polatbay described the crime scenes down to the smallest details. A subsequent investigation of his parents' home revealed a handkerchief belonging to one of the victims, which Berdaliyev had given to his mother. Stolen jewelry was also found in possession of the killer's future wife. In an attempt to get a shorter sentence, Berdaliyev pretended to have been traumatized and remorseful by his actions, but his bluff was called out by the investigators. Both he and Ormanov were sentenced to life imprisonment for rape, robbery and murder. Berdaliyev was eventually extradited back to his homeland, but the same sentence awaited him there. References